Believe it or not, there's a reason why I chose silver over gold. My name is Silver Slayer, not Gold Guy, not Gold Guru, not Bitcoin Boy, not Bitcoin Bandit. It's Silver Slayer for a reason. There's a reason why it's called Wall Street Silver, not Wall Street Gold. There's a reason why there's such a big silver stacking community on YouTube and not so much gold. There are real reasons for this. We didn't just randomly choose it out of a hat. But what happened? Something is way off and completely wrong. When you look at the gold to silver ratio for thousands upon thousands of years, they're essentially the same until very recently. And I think what happened is much more sinister at play. Now, the chart that we're about to go over only shows the gold to silver ratio for the past 200 years, so I want to brief you on a quick history lesson. In biblical days, ancient days, I'm talking about the beginning, it was 2.5 parts silver equals 1 part gold. The ratio was 2.5 to 1. And then over time, it was 8 to 1 because that's the ratio that it comes out of the ground. Makes sense, right? And then later on, I'm talking thousands of years in between, then it was 16 to 1. This is when gold kind of became the royal metal, more kings. And then something happened in 1930. And yes, I said 1930. The gold to silver ratio previous from that has always been around 8 to 1, 16 to 1. But in 1930, FDR got in office and changed it from 16 to 1 to 75 to 1 overnight, single-handedly devaluing silver, and it never really recovered since then. Now, it's funny because that ratio should be flip-flopped. Silver should be 75 times more valuable than gold is. I mean, silver is much more useful, isn't it? And they noticed that back in the day. Some say the ratio was even 1 to 1. Why? Because silver had magical powers back then for them. They literally thought silver was magical. It can purify water. Silver has antimicrobial properties. That's why it's so heavily used in the medical world today. You could drop silver in water, it purifies the water. Drop silver in milk, it keeps the milk fresh longer. Silver responds to other elements like no other metal does. Silver is the most highly conductive metal for thermal conductivity, electricity, even light sensitivity, hence why it's used in mirrors. It's funny because most gold is used for jewelry, right? Necklaces, watches, earrings, coins, right? There is some gold in electronics. I used to scrap gold out of laptops and cell phones myself, but a very small percentage. It's mainly used for it's a monetary metal, not an industrial metal. So gold used for jewelry, stuff like that. Kind of fancy, mainly used because it is shiny. Silver is used for solar panels, 5G towers, electric vehicles. You get what I'm saying? Why silver plays a much more critical role. We're talking about just wearing a watch and an earring and a coin compared to a solar panel that's supposed to help kill global warming. Big difference, right? Now, moving forwards, I do think there will become a day and age where the gold to silver ratio will naturally come back down, and there's completely different reasons that I'm saying that, not just looking historically, but looking futuristically, and that's because silver's role as we advance in this new digital technological era that we're so quickly headed in. So let's look at this article. It's talking about charting the gold to silver ratio over 200 years. I like this chart a lot, just not only for educational purposes, but to really apply this to why silver and not gold. A lot of people say, why do you invest into silver and not gold? Isn't gold so much better? And no, it's not. So, also known as the mint ratio, the gold to silver ratio represents how many ounces of silver are equivalent to 1 ounce of gold, and here's how it has changed over time. It's also a great tool to tell whether gold or silver is the better investment at that point in time. Now, what I mean by that is this. March 2020, the gold to silver ratio was 125 to 1. 125 ounces of silver it took to equal 1 ounce of gold. That was the cheapest silver's ever been compared to gold. Silver was $11 back then, just in March 2020. We saw gold up to $2,000 in 2000, broke the highest price it's ever been throughout the 5,000 years. But now the ratio is back down dramatically, around 75, 80 to 1. meaning that silver has astronomically outperformed gold since then. When the ratio is going down, that means that silver's outperforming gold. When the ratio is going up, that means gold is outperforming silver. So, July 1822 to March 2022. Historically, the ratio was set by government to establish monetary value. For example, the Roman Empire officially set the ratio at 12 to 1, right? And we're talking about this is nowhere near as far back as the biblical times, right? So anyways, since 1687, the gold to silver ratio is wavered between 14 and 100. Now, and this is the early 20th century, once the metal prices started to fluctuate due to market forces, the ratio did as well. So you could see right here, and it's kind of hard to tell. It tells the dates, but it doesn't show what the ratio was. They should have had another thing on the side right here. But anyways, the end of World War I, the ratio was 18 to 1. Start of World War II, the ratio was 99.8 to 1. And then you see, and that was really, that was an insane ratio. But also remember right here, this was 1930 when the gold to silver ratio went from naturally 16 to 1 to 75 to 1, like I was talking about, right? It's always been around 16 to 1, 12 to 1, and then all of a sudden 1930, like I mentioned in the intro, all of a sudden it's way up here. Now, you can see down here, it goes back down, right? It recovers. That means that silver is outperforming gold astronomically. But then something happened. Here's the 1968 gold crisis, 1971. President Nixon ends the gold standard, and that's tying the U.S. dollar to gold. And it was like, what? Something very silly. But anyways, here is where everything changes. And when I say something silly, I mean that it was like $50 or something for an ounce of gold, and that was a set standard. Now we can see the 1980 situation with the Hunt brothers cornering the silver market, setting the price of silver all the way up to $50, the highest price it's ever been still till this day. Now, this is talking about that situation, but you can see the gold to silver ratio is still fairly low. I really do wish that they set the ratio on the side right here, but you can see that this is 12 to 1. So if the ratio so this is 16 to 1. So it's probably around 11 to 1 right here. This is around 11 to 1. And then you can see going up here, this is the first time, or I guess the second time the ratio got close to 100. But nothing tops in March of 2020 when the ratio was up to, right here they say 123, but 125 to 1. Obviously when silver's sitting at $11. And you can see actually up here the peak, it almost has to go off the chart. If you look at that black dot, so much higher than it's ever been. I mean, we witnessed history. We'll be reading about that in history books, and that was only 2 years ago. So anyways, let's look at what they're saying the gold to silver ratio means and what all this really means. So long before the gold to silver ratio was allowed to float freely, the ratio of these two metals was fixed by empires and governments to control the value of their currency and coinage. And if you ever watch any type of like old movie or so many different shows on Netflix, they're always talking about silver. They fight over silver, they steal the silver, they collect the silver. It's always silver, right? They buy things with silver. It's always silver. Start to notice that, how big of a role silver plays, and how big of a role it always has played and always will play, right? Gold doesn't make sense for coinage too much since gold is so valuable nowadays, or even back then, even at 16 to 1, it's much more convenient to use silver shillings and silver pieces compared to gold, where it'd be like little, crumbs in terms of value. So now they go down here, gold and silver's ancient beginnings. Ancient Rome was one of the earliest ancient civilizations to set a gold to silver ratio starting as low as 8 to 1 in 210 BCE. And honestly, I don't think this is very accurate because I have read way, way, way earlier ratios than ancient Rome. I'm talking about biblical days when they literally would set a ratio of 2.5 parts silver equals 1 part gold. Um, this is probably not going back that far. And if they are talking about ancient civilizations to set a gold to silver ratio, they're probably not talking about some type of culture that set a standard, but what it was used as trade and bartering. I'm actually going to pause the video right here and pull up some information on that, so stay tuned. And ironically, I did some digging and I realized this same exact article that we're reading actually mentions that ratio, that and I was spot on. They said long before the ratio was allowed to float freely, like I was just saying before, a culture set a standard. The ratio between these two metals was fixed by empires and governments to control the value of their currency. The earliest recorded instance dates back to 3200 BCE, when Menes, the first king of Egypt, set a ratio at 2.5 to 1. Since then, the ratio has only seen gold's value rise as empires and governments became more familiar with the scarcity and difficulty of production for the two metals, which would be 8 to 1, which is the ratio it comes out of the ground. Now, ancient Rome was one of the earliest civilizations to set a gold to silver ratio, starting at 8 to 1 in 210 BC. Now, we're talking about 3200 BCE, and this is 210 BCE. Over the decades, varying gold and silver inflows from Rome's conquest caused the ratio to fluctuate between 8 to 12 ounces of silver for every ounce of gold. By 46 BCE, Julius Caesar had established a standard of 11.5 to 1. But the whole point of this video isn't just to look at the gold to silver ratio historically, it's the context behind it, behind the scenes. Why is silver so much more undervalued compared to gold? Why is the gold to silver ratio sitting at 70s and 80s to 1 when silver is actually much more useful? Well, it has a lot to do with just the man-made stereotype of gold being the royal metal. Like I said, gold doesn't play much of a part moving forwards in the industrial, technological, digital era that we're advancing into. Silver plays that massive role, and that's why I also say I think the gold to silver ratio will drop back down to historical levels when people realize how big of a role, how critical, how vital of a role silver has to play in the upcoming near future. Also, why I think silver will take on a life of its own. It's kind of funny how the gold to silver ratio moves, or even the price of gold compared to silver moves so similar when they're used for two completely different things. So anyways, I just wanted to cover this because what happened? What do you think happened? Yes, we know that in 1930, FDR changed it from 16 to 1 to 75 to 1, but rightfully so. When you look at what happened, we're talking about the end of World War I, and a lot changed since then. A lot changed. That changed everything. And then we're talking about getting off the gold standard, in 1971, but then about 100 years earlier, almost to date, we got rid of the silver standard. Right when we got rid of the gold standard, everything went to crap. If you look at a chart of the dollar strength, as soon as we got rid of the gold standard, the dollar's value just plummets, and I'm talking tenfold within the next 2-3 years. We need money backed by something, and actually, that's not even money. We need the dollar backed by something of actual value, because if not, then it's literally just as valuable as people think it is. So if people start to think that the dollar's not valuable, it literally isn't. That's dangerous, especially since the USD is the world's reserve currency, and since this virus exposed how broke we really are. That's a whole separate video. The point is, though, that silver has been single-handedly devalued by man, and there's a much more sinister, not natural reason to why. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe. I post daily videos, and you don't want to miss out. Thanks for tuning in. This is Silver Slayer. I'll see you guys soon. Peace.